for more on the terror attacks in France and look at what Jewish and Muslim communities in France are facing. I'm joined from London by Jonathan Sacerdoti. He's a terrorism analyst and an award-winning political and cultural commentator. Jonathan, thanks for being on the program.
It's good to be with you.
So let's talk about the impact these horrific attacks have had on the Jewish community in France.
Well, it's true that this was a horrific attack for the Jewish community, and it wasn't the first either. It's certainly not an isolated event. You've got to remember that not long ago, Islamic extremist terrorists also targeted a Jewish school in Toulouse in France, killing Jewish children purely because they were Jewish. And similarly, over in Brussels, not that far away, there was the shooting at the Jewish museum there, killing, again, 4 people just because they're Jewish. Here, with the Charlie Hebdo attack, these people were targeted as caricaturists, cartoonists, and journalists because they upheld certain values of the West, including freedom of speech and the right to speak out and mock certain things which certain other faiths like Islam don't allow. In the same way that those people were targeted because of their status of upholding these Western values, Jews were targeted in that kosher grocery store, which the terrorists also took hostages in and then brutally murdered people simply because of their Judaism, which of course has meant that French people, looking back at this history of killing that's going on there at the hands of jihadi terrorists, are now quite afraid of further attacks on Jews, and there's a record number of French Jews leaving that country and emigrating to Israel as a result.
So are they leaving and immigrating to Israel because of fear of what the extremists can do, or because they don't have any confidence in the fact that the French government can protect them?
Well, in part it has to be both. I mean, if the extremist terrorists weren't targeting them, the French government wouldn't have to protect them. But also what we're seeing here is an increase in this kind of attack, of so-called soft target attacks, rather than targeting parliamentary buildings or similar places which have high security now. These sorts of Islamic extremist terrorists are targeting people and places which have lower security. It's not normal for a kosher grocery store to have high security. Already Jews in most of Europe have to have razor wire and airport-style security around their places of worship and often their schools, especially in the wake of that attack on the Toulouse school. But grocery stores, it's not yet somewhere that there was that level of security. And Jews have always been a target for Islamic extremist fundamentalist terrorists. So it's clear to the Jewish community in France and even over here in Great Britain that there is an increased threat, with terror attacks even having been attempted here in the United Kingdom. As recently as 2012, a Muslim couple here in the UK were convicted of creating a bomb that could have killed dozens of people, and they had in their possession research of Jewish targets that they could have exploded it in.
Let me get back to the situation in France. The culture of fear doesn't just exist among Jews, it also exists among the Muslim community who are afraid of a backlash. What's being done, in your opinion, to protect them? Just in the past week, France has seen an alarming rise in violent anti-Muslim acts across the country. So they have that in common. The Jews and the Muslims are both afraid right now.
This is one of the worst aspects of Islamic fundamentalist terror. You will remember that one of the policemen that was actually killed in the Charlie Hebdo incident was in fact a Muslim. That didn't stop those terrorists from killing him and shooting him. And in a way, we need to look deeper into the ideology to understand why they would target fellow Muslims. And as far as they're concerned, if you're collaborating with the West, such as a police officer might be considered in their ideology to be doing, you are a fair target also, because you are not fulfilling what they consider to be true Islam. As a result of this, it's the case that all the peace-loving Muslims in France and elsewhere in the world, of which, of course, there are many, possibly even a majority in, of course, these people are resistant sometimes to speaking out too publicly because it will create a situation where they are also targets. And as a result, that means that there's social tension in much of Europe where people are resenting Muslims in general, and this level of fear about Islam in general is spreading. And this is quite unfair as well for those people, because naturally peace-loving, ordinary Muslim people are no threat to Jews or to the West at all.
So, Jonathan, what is the solution here? How do you bridge the gap? How do you bridge the divide between these two communities?
Well, I think more than anything else, the true question has to be how minority communities can be protected. And the biggest threat at the moment in France and in Europe is to communities like the Jewish community. As I said, Islamic fundamentalism the world over has always targeted Jews. So it's imperative that those people are protected. It's also imperative that Muslims are protected from any kind of vigilante attack that might be carried out on them. The state needs to get tough on any kind of extremism, but especially on Islamic fundamentalism, which is really at the core of this whole upheaval and the core of all of these tensions. Europe needs to start taking seriously this problem, and it needs to stop suggesting that these attacks, which we are seeing more and more of, are somehow lone wolf attacks or one-off isolated incidences, when it's becoming clear that jihadis born within European countries are traveling to the Middle East and training there, returning to carry out these sorts of carefully planned, often highly financed attacks. And that is how the West is slowly losing that battle in order to uphold its values in the face of this extremist ideology.
All right, thank you very much, Jonathan Sacerdoti, joining us from London.